This slide here is a 12-year-old that is, for some reason, the caption is not coming up on that. But it's a 12-year-old that's stuck in stress response. So this is a good review of actually looking at brain energy patterns. And the cursor isn't working as well. So let's see here. So my cursor isn't working up there without taking the time to do that. This is very overactive on top. This is your overall brain energy, or the EEG. This is a good frequency, healthy beta, but it is too high and it's driving anxiety. So it can cause worry, stress, fear, angst, you name it. It's not a good feeling. In this case, this 12-year-old is stuck in stress response just within a minute and a half. It shifts, and because I can explain in detail how the brain is basically being projected onto the monitor, and it's a mirror for the brain to actually change. You know, not much different than when we look in the mirror and we want to initiate an action that's appropriate to comb our hair or shave, or put our makeup, whatever it is. So you can see how fast that shifted into much less of a exaggerated pattern, into a normal pattern. So the important part of this is that the patient was actually primarily having difficulty in school, and has for a long time, but it was complicated by sleep issues. So the reason most practitioners don't look at this, they don't have the equipment to look at this. So you can't look at stress response, and if you can't find this way, you can't retrain it through my methods. So we have the ability to change that stress response, and in her case, a lot of anxiety. The anxiety was spilling over and causing insomnia. She couldn't sleep. That was making her tired during the day. It's going to obviously affect learning. And I'm talking in detail about how important sleep is. So it was interfering with her ability to learn. And if I did nothing else but just specialize in stress patterns, it would have a remarkable effect on the child's or the teen's ability to learn, because they have the proper concentration and they can get the information they need and retain it. So improving very overactive areas, and you're going to see weak areas, creates balance. So if you have one very overactive area that is down into back into a normal range, and it matches the other side of the brain, it's going to create much more balance. In this case, it improved her function and it decreased her symptoms, and it happened pretty quickly. And I'm going to talk more about this case in a little bit. In this case, her emotions were actually hijacking her. The myth about we only use 10% of her brain, the brain was using her, because her emotions literally hijacked her, and she was stuck in that response. So the portal to the brain, very simple. We have sensors. You're going to see a little slide of that, and we just use a little bit of adhesive, and it's a very simple process of how we actually get the brain waves up on the screen to create some changes. So the brain, I'm not going to read these slides to you, but the brain is very complex, and it drives a lot of our life. You're going to see in detail how much is related to the brain, what the higher functions are, how we can access those higher functions. The analogy of a hot water heater starting to get old over time and losing the ability to produce hot water. When you get in the shower, you have warm water to begin with. It's not even hot to begin with, and then it diminishes. That's analogous to the brain having issues. A lot of them are from emotional traumas, but more from physical injury, head traumas, concussions, brain injuries. So I'm going to go right into, this is my treatment process. So my treatment process, the two top things there are what I've combined into a separate discipline. This is my innovation, taking two disciplines, brainwave training and sensory activation, which is actually called functional neurology. That is where true healing takes place. You're going to see some slides of the power of that. The last two are healing, they're more supportive therapies. So I use those last two to magnify the effects of the two top ones that I've combined. And then, so that's going to be the long-lasting, permanent type of treatment. Whereas you can use supplementation, and you can use what I'm going to describe at the very end, this healing current, to help patients. but it doesn't necessarily fix their problems. They're supportive therapies, and there's nothing wrong with using them. There are practitioners that'll just use one of those, and they help patients, but they're not getting to the root issues of what the patient's problems really are. So I prioritize those treatments. I've also been trained in brain-based chiropractic, which is a way to treat just one side of the brain by adjusting only on one side. So that's much more specific in general than having adjustments to both sides of your neck or your back. So this actually is starting to describe exactly what I've combined. EEG neurofeedback, we're displaying brain waves, creating change, and sensory activation. And I'm going to specifically tell you about that sensory activation and how we do it. So this is what's proprietary in my treatment. I've combined these things, and I call it activation EEG. It is a treatment that is unique to my office, but I believe, even though it's my intellectual property and proprietary, that I was given this so I can expand the work, to multiply it, and the best way to do that is to teach other healthcare practitioners and doctors how to do the work. So that's one of my visions, to expand it to treat veterans at no charge, because they're very often plagued with the very things that we help: traumatic brain injury, concussions, anxiety, panic attacks, sleep problems, depression. All those things are helped by this process. So I want to expand the work. Eventually it may take an actual investor to expand it rapidly the way I want, because I want to start brain and life centers, because this process is not just looking at ADD or seizures or concussions. It looks at the brain comprehensively. So when I diagnose the brain, I'm diagnosing the brain as it's working or not working, not a condition. And we're able to see, so the diagnosis is consistent with what I see. And so I'm going to talk about other types of traditional neurofeedback in a second. So all the details of this slide are not important. What's important is that when we use the sensors on the scalp, we're getting information from the outer layer of the brain, the cerebral cortex. And that is where most of the brain cells are. That's where the major communication is. And so the reason this is important is because we can display this activity, and that's the very activity that we can change. And you're going to see it on the next slide, how complex and high functions are really accessed to be able to change. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide here. So these are the functions of the covering of the brain, or the surface of the brain, that we're looking at, and you can see they're very complex. We'll put the sensors on the scalp to display that information of the higher functions so that change can occur. And an example of one of these higher functions, let's just take the first one, thinking. So thinking is taking place on the surface of the brain, this information that we display. How we handle stress, which is a huge problem, stress and anxiety, is a function of that cerebral cortex. That's a really big deal. We have the ability to shift that and change that. And if you look at all the other functions there, they're numerous, and it goes on beyond that. Even our moral calculations, our spirituality, there's a lot of stuff in there. The subconscious mind doesn't reside in a certain part of the brain. It's a model. There's no specific area for the subconscious mind that drives our life. So it's actually just part of the brain, and specifically it's the cortex, because our thinking is taking place in the subconscious area. And there's a lot of helpful things about conscious thinking, mindfulness, awareness, or just trying to stay focused. They all take place at that cortex level. If the cortex is out of balance, it's not functioning properly, the person's not going to have full access to their brain. They're not going to be able to access exactly what they need. So when we think in terms of all the different afflictions, anorexia, bulimia, addiction, actors and celebrities committing suicide, all taking place at that cortex level. On the surface of the brain, that's the information that we can display and change. Also, it's important to note that, and I'll show you some slides, brain damage is not always permanent. So one of the problems with the drug addictions and the alcohol abuse and so forth is that, especially the drugs, they'll do actual damage to the brain. So when you look at these celebrities that are going through rehab over and over and over, the thing that's missing is they don't have access to their brain. Nobody's repairing their brain. They're doing everything else except that. So this is a good combination of modalities into one discipline, a new discipline that can actually create that. So most people don't have the ability to say, you know, I don't think I need an evaluation. I don't think I need my brain checked because I can focus well. I sleep well. I don't have anxiety. My mood is good. You know, my decision making is good. I don't have any problems with relationships. You know, it goes on and on and on. Most people can't say that. You know, the majority of people I see have a lot of anxiety. They have depression. They have insomnia. Those are very prevalent. So it's really an application for most people. It's very easy to find out where the issues are that are causing the symptoms. Again, the sensors are going to be placed on the scalp so we can collect that information of the cortex, display it, and give the brain an opportunity to change. So it's changing even though you're not aware of it, because you're not aware of your heart beating, your food digesting. There's a lot of processes that we're just not in touch with. So I'm going to have to go through these really quick, but I'm just going to make a few comments on each one of these. If I were to only change one or two of these symptoms, it could have a dramatic impact on kids' ability to learn, teens' ability to learn. It can change adults. Rarely is the brain compromised just in one area, so I'm looking at all the lobes of the brain. Typically what happens is more than one area is affected, so it's not one area that's creating one symptom, it's multiple areas creating multiple symptoms. And that's why I have to look at all the areas of the brain. So you're going to see some before and afters. Very, very common to be stuck in these stress patterns, and we certainly can get people unstuck. So with regard to depression, I had a traumatic brain injury which got me into this work years ago in a car accident, and I thought it was just a simple concussion, but one of my primary symptoms was depression. I also had fatigue, and every symptom you can think of that's a concussion symptom, including dyslexic symptoms, which I never had dyslexia. So I was reversing letters and words. It was a significant injury, even though I didn't end up in the hospital. It really affected my brain. So it threw my brain out of balance, and I had one really overactive side. And you know, I was given antidepressants, and they didn't work, and they just gave me side effects. But when I started doing the training, I did it in Beverly Hills by my mentor, Margaret Ayers, one of the world's experts in EEG neurofeedback, one of the pioneers. She was able to help me in her process, and my depression lifted in about 10 to 12 sessions. So this was not a biochemical problem. It was the cause and event was very clear. I had a traumatic brain injury. I didn't have any depression before that. So insomnia is very similar. People can have traumas and they can start having insomnia. And it's essential to sleep to get to the point where you can learn easily and retain that information. So adolescents need actually 9 hours of sleep, and the average is 7. The American Academy of Pediatrics is recommending that schools start at 8:30 for a very good reason. So if kids were to get 9 hours sleep, the ones they've studied, learning can increase by 40%. So when I help a student to sleep better, I'm helping them to learn better. There's a direct correlation. I see it all the time. I have for years. And the quality of sleep is just as important before learning as after. Clearly, if you don't have a good night's sleep, you're going to be tired, and that's going to affect your learning. But having a good night's sleep and learning and being, having energy, and then having a poor night's sleep after that is a problem. It's like creating a document and you forget to hit the save button. So, and it can be cyclical. So, sleep deprivation can also lead to depression. Of all the age groups, adolescents, #1, chronically sleep deprived. So that's a big problem. So I always focus on that. When I work with kids and teens, I ask them, I'm right next to them, and I say, what do you need help with? I mean, I've looked at the forms, I've talked to the parents, what do you need help with? Do you need to feel calmer? Do you need to feel more alert? Do you need to sleep better? We go through them one at a time. And I don't talk to their parents about what they need. A lot of times, the parents aren't aware of it. And in some cases, when the parent steps out, or they go do errands, I'm talking to the teen, they feel much more open to opening up. After a while, they know I'm there to help them. So, you know, I'll say, how's your sleep? Oh, it's good, it's better. How's your stress? Good. Any problems? Well, I worry. What do you worry about? So we get into that, and it comes out, and the parent isn't necessarily aware of that, you know, especially the teenagers, you know, because they want to live their own life. And so consistently what I see is that with regards to, say, focus and concentration, that the problem areas are overactive and weak areas are uncovered in the evaluation. When we fix those, it correlates into better focus and concentration. So I consistently see that that's the cause of the problem, weakness or overactivity. So with regard to stimulants like, say, Ritalin and Adderall, they activate the brain everywhere, not selectively. The drugs cannot target the weak areas by themselves the way I can selectively. So there's a big difference, and you know, drugs cannot create better brain balance, because I would see people on medication, whether it's antidepressants that adults are taking or Ritalin and Adderall that kids are taking, and I would say, wow, you've got pretty even hemispheres. Not the case. Not the case with a lot of treatments that are trying to address the brain. So displaying these brain waves is an opportunity to create some change. That's how we need to do it. So if I were to look at, say, kids that are 17-year-olds and driving, and then an adult that's 77-year-olds, you know, they have 60 years experience on the 17-year-old. But what's really important to me is if somebody's digressed in their function and they're not a competent driver anymore, they can be compared to somebody that is a competent driver at that same age. So what's the difference? What about teens that are getting into accidents and fender benders and always backing up into poles? What's the difference between them and their peers? This is a Newsweek article, August 2007. So Allstate, a car insurance company, takes out an ad. And the ad says, why do most 16-year-olds drive like they're missing part of the brain? Because they are. And there's a missing part of the brain. So that is an issue. The developing brain, not looking at, you know, decision making is going to lead to certain consequences. Everybody knows that. Insurance companies know that the brain typically develops fully in the mid-20s. So that's where the insurance rates go down. We know now by science that it's actually by about age 30. So it takes even longer than we thought initially. So head injuries is what I'm looking at, not just a teen's a teen. I'm looking at how disproportionately this child's life is, or this teen's life is, to the others. So I'm looking for reasons why. If you have increased on your right side, that's not so good, because there's 20% communication to the other side. So this is what I'm always looking for. Is there balance or not? If you have perfect balance here, and then your left side is decreased, that's a problem. If you have this going on, that's a problem. If you have this going on, that's a huge problem. You can even have a little decrease here and a lot of increase here. The further you have imbalance, the greater the imbalance, the greater the symptoms are going to be. And the higher probability that that patient's going to respond really fast when they start coming into balance. So processing is important. Right and left hemispheres have to be in balance for good processing. When it comes to foggy and spacey, my computer actually, there's a lot of detail that it gives me, a lot of numbers that it gives me, and it tells me if you're producing more sleep waves or more alpha waves that are going to make you more spacey and foggy. And when I find those, I report it to the patient and I say, you know, this shows that you have a tendency not to be so sleepy during the day, but actually to feel like you're foggy and spacey. And they go, yeah, that's right, that's right. It's pretty accurate. Poor judgment, decision making, those are functions of the cerebral cortex as well. The higher functions, and you know, when the cerebral cortex energy is off and we improve it, that will translate into a better balance with both of those things, judgment and decision making. So here's the way my process would work for emotions. What we do is we're looking to uncover brainwave patterns that show that the brain is compromised, it's not functioning normally, and then we observe whether these patterns are improving or not, and then we observe if the symptoms are reduced and eliminated. So when the process works for emotional issues, which are very common, just as much as cognitive issues, then we know it's addressing the culprit. The emotional issue improved, we're addressing the culprit. No different than if your car doesn't start, you take it to the mechanic, he says, I don't think it's the battery, but we'll check it. No, the battery's good. I think it's a starter, we'll check it. The starter's bad. Replace the starter, car starts. So it's a way to deduce that what you've done was directly related to the problem. The improvements were directly proportionate to what the problem was. So toxic stress is a really big issue. You saw that being stuck in stress response. So it's the body's stress response that's ending up in the brain, and it gets stuck. It becomes wired, but it can get unstuck. So it's the tiger, the lion that's chasing us, that stopped chasing us, but we still have that same fear. We're stuck in fight or flight, or sympathetic dominance. And stress is terrible because it does so many bad things to the brain. So all these things, anxiety, sleep issues, all these things need to be dealt with in order to reduce the stress of the brain. I had a patient that I was on the phone with years ago, and I remember this vividly. She said, I'm looking for my cell phone, and she was panicked. It's just like, you know, we couldn't finish a conversation. I'm looking for my cell phone. I thought she had a second cell phone that she had lost. Oh, I'm on it. That's how bad it got. And you know, it's funny, but it's so sad too, that her brain was compromised that much. And it would show up. If you met her, if you saw her even without talking to her, you could see how, you know, she didn't have the ability to focus on anything. Also, I evaluated a healthcare practitioner and very high stress patterns in her brain. And we were texting back and forth, and I wasn't hearing back from her, so I texted her, and she said, oh, I guess I need to hit the send button when I write you a text. Very smart lady, you know, she's very talented, she's an author. And so I'm going to go on to really good stuff here, and I try to go as fast as I can. So this is the opportunity for change, doing neurofeedback training. And this can assist the brain in getting unstuck from a lot of different patterns. So you can not just be stuck in a stress pattern, be stuck in a pattern that affects your mood and your attitude, your joy and your happiness, your organization. It could be anything. And in the middle there, hemisphericity is a fancy word for lack of balance in the brain. And it's rarely talked about. But if you look at scientific literature, it's all over the place. And it is, you know, causing problems in processing. That's one of the ones I already mentioned. It diminishes the brain's ability to process information, and you're going to see an ADD case that was misdiagnosed, and this was the problem. So we found two things in this ADD case that's coming up. We found very overactive frontal lobes, improved by 70%, and the anxiety came way down. So that's going to help learning, especially right before a test when you don't have all this anxiety raging in your system. And it's also, it was the inequity we found, the imbalance in the left side. One side was almost twice as high as the other, and after 15 sessions they were nearly balanced. And so you'll see that slide in a little bit. So, and I had a real difficult time after my head trauma, and you know, it was like a mild concussion, you know, but very uneven hemispheres after that. And My problem would be if I got really tired. If I was talking to a family member or a friend, I couldn't process what they were saying. I could certainly hear what they were saying, but it didn't make sense to me. And I would say, you know, talk to me later, my brain's tired. They knew I had a car accident. And they would just repeat it. You know, I looked fine, but the brain wasn't working fine. So brain imbalance is the most common fixable brain problem there is, in my opinion. It's not hard to find, it's not hard to fix, bar none. It is the biggest problem and the easiest to fix, I think. So there's great benefits, not just processing to getting that brain balance, because the stress pattern in that 12-year-old happened to be on the right side. So if you were to look at her left side, it would have looked much more normal. So it really, you know, if I was part of the Bill Gates and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they said, you can only do one thing, what is it going to be? And I would say, you know, can I try to create balance in everybody's brain from age 5 to 55, 60, 65? That would be my request, because it's so powerful to get that balance back. There are kids that are having head injuries left and right. My parents never knew I had one head injury, and I had multiple ones, and they were right in front of the house on the sidewalk. That affected me emotionally, because I was a very sensitive kid. And years later, when I have this car accident and I get the treatment for it that finally addresses that issue, it addressed all those other issues as well. So I felt much more balanced emotionally. So, you know, it's an approach